My mom is Jeanne Antebi, and my dad is Maurice Antebi. They were both born in Cairo, Egypt, December 2nd, 1945, and I was born a year and a half later. And we had just a ordinary life in Cairo, as far as I can remember, until the war broke out.
My grandfather, on my father's side, had four siblings. I think there was three boys and two girls. And they left Syria in the early 1900s. And three of them, including my grandfather, ended up in Cairo, where my father was born. He didn't have a really pleasant childhood. He was pressed into adulthood at an early age. And so consequently, he was rather stern and strict, and to me, it was not a lot of fun.
Mom worked for her uncle from a very young age, some 17, 18 years of age. She's the oldest of seven. So she was sort of helping her family. And she worked in a photography studio. Her uncle, her mom's brother, owned the biggest studio in Cairo. And she sold cameras, developed pictures, and she was very, very industrious, and she's competent in photography and cameras, knowledgeable. And that's where my father came in one day to have some pictures and met my mom. In Cairo, or in the Middle East, you don't just go to the girl and ask her out. He had to have proper introductions. So he asked her father to introduce him to my mom. And they had a short courtship, and then they were married. My father was an accountant, different companies. We moved around a lot in Egypt, from different cities, different neighborhoods, according to his job. And so I remember moving in many apartments. One of the most memorable one was in Masr Gadida, which means the new Cairo. It's a suburb, and it was beautiful country. It was open, and we always went to private schools.
What comes to my mind is the pressure they had to endure as to have four kids go from Egypt to France and from France to the US. So when we moved here in 1961, I don't remember how old Dad was, in his 40s, right? And he died suddenly at work on a Saturday in 1972, June 1972. And I got a phone call saying, in the morning, your father died. And they said he went to the hospital, but he had died. And I remember the shock of it. It was the only consolation to me was during the week of mourning, the Shiva, and everybody came, people just came from all the congregation, the community, is how much he accomplished.
Cairo was a beautiful city, cosmopolitan. I never felt not wanted as a Jewish person, but I knew they didn't want us there because I just saw my mom and dad, making preparations toward the end. I didn't feel it until I was like maybe 10. But up till then, we went out. We went to the Corniche, which is the Nile. We took buggy rides every Saturday night. We ate corn on the cob roasted, falafel sandwiches. It was just a wonderful life. We took cabs because we didn't own a car. I used to come home from school in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, listening to the soap operas on the radio, which was in Arabic. So I used to, just had a normal life and couldn't wait to listen to the next day, the next episode. And then Mom would take us to the theater, which is always open. It never rains in Egypt. So it was a highlight to go to the theater, to the movie, which is like your drive-in here, but it was sitting with no tops, So it was a wonderful life, but I knew something was brewing.
Egypt, I just knew that I just never felt like this is where I'm gonna live. It just was, you know, a lot of whispering, a lot of unsafe. We were comfortable. We were relatively affluent. We had servants. We had good food. Like Judy mentioned, we had our clothes made, handmade. Our shoes were custom made because they didn't have shoe stores.
My furthest recollection of the feeling that we had to leave, we always had a suitcase ready from as far back as I can remember. And my father always said, we're just guests here. We never were Egyptian. We didn't have a nationality per se. We were Jewish living as guests in Cairo, Egypt.
I was born in 48, and my mom often said that it was a very difficult time for her because I was born and they were beating up her brothers in the street, and she was very upset. She was trying to nurse me, and her mother is crying because they left one of her brothers for dead in the street.
The next thing I remember, 1956. That's when the Suez Canal, when Nasser closed. And so Israel became at war with Egypt. And I remember I heard the sirens. And we lived in an apartment building, like 7, 8 stories high. And we lived at the bottom, on the first floor. So during the raid, they all came down to our apartment, turned all the lights off. And we were like, Leah was a baby. She was a year old, 1956. She's born in 55. And I thought it was exciting because everybody was at my apartment. Everybody was scared, but Susie and I were like, and Mark, it was like a party. So I think all of us went under the bed, the kids hiding, and the adults were talking. My uncle, my mom's brother was pacing. I remember him going back and forth, and we heard the Israeli airplanes on top of us.
And the British and the French.
And the British and the French, and so we could have been bombed anytime. But it was, to me, it was adventurous, but I knew it was dangerous, you know. And then after that, people started getting their papers. They had to leave.
They didn't have to leave in 48, but they were so scared to remain that a lot of people were expelled from in Egypt. If you were British, if you had property, the wealthier you are, the quicker they got rid of you.
Egypt, I don't have many memories at all. I have a memory of leaving. That, for some reason, I do remember. I imagine, it was so traumatic that I remember that. For some reason, I remember getting on the boat, or being on the dock. I was 3 years old, but I do have that memory.
I remember when my aunt Bahia was leaving, and their last night they spent with us in our apartment in Cairo, and they were crying, and you wonder, why did we stay there, knowing that we don't have a good life? Why not leave sooner? And it's because you want to be with your family. And my aunt was crying, "Oh, God curse you, Nasser, for tearing our family apart. May you die," whatever. She was cursing him. And turned out, they went to France. And so most of my family ended up in Israel. Most of my dad's siblings and my mom's 5 brothers and sisters ended up in Israel. And we somehow found our way to Atlanta and grew our clan here.
We are transported from Cairo to Alexandria
By train.
And we're going to board a boat. From Alexandria to Marseille, we were on a refugee ship. And a refugee ship is not exactly a luxury liner. And we had multiple families to a cabin and triple deckers.
No, the
men and the women were separate.
The men are separate, and the women with their children in a cabin.
With bunk beds.
Bunk beds.
triple beds.
So, yeah.
And it turns out, I did some research this morning, the typical boat ride for a cargo ship or thus a refugee ship from Alexandria to Marseille was 11 days. So our trip, and it seemed like it lasted forever, was 11 days long in the Mediterranean Sea. And I had a friend who I was rather chummy with, Abraham Israel.
Yeah.
And we were, 8 years old. We were 8-year-old boys, very, curious. And so we befriended the Greek and the Italian crew. And we somehow got 2 cigarettes from them. And I remember we had no idea what we were doing. And there we were, 8-year-old Jewish boys on a refugee ship, living the life, smoking a cigarette.
I had no idea.
But the 11-day journey just about killed my mother. It was
November.
It was November. He had just
choppy.
turned 8.
Yeah, I was 8 years old.
Choppy water.
To say the waters were choppy on this massive, cargo ship turned refugee ship is an understatement. And
We were seasick the whole time. We never ate.
And one of Leah's recollections of our cabin
Is him falling in the middle of the night off
Boom.
the
Off
third
the
bunk.
third bunk.
Every day.
That's like one of my first childhood memories.
I remember the ship docked for a few hours in Italy.
Yeah.
And I remember my father got off and came back with Italian tomatoes. And we were like, we hadn't seen fresh vegetables in so many days, we just devoured them. He bought some tomatoes for it. Remember that? And it was, but then after that, I don't know how many more days until we got to Marseille. It was awful. The smell.
And we probably didn't have kosher food.
No. Well, we would go to the cafeteria, whatever, where they fed us, and we would ask Dad, can we eat this? Can we eat that? We'd never eaten out, like I said. In Cairo, we'd only have grains, the falafel, the pita bread, the feta cheese, the hummus, or dessert. So we never really ate non-kosher food because we didn't. It wasn't like we had choices. We never ate meat out.
We took a train from Marseille to Paris, and then when we got to the train station, it was my first introduction to croissant. And I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. And so that was lovely, arriving in Paris. And then we were in a hotel in Montmartre. It was being, 10 years old, 9 years old?
No, 10 and a half. I was 11 and a
I
half.
never saw the hardships that my parents, I just was enamored with.
We were all excited being in a hotel.
Paris, and then we were walking in Montmartre, and you see all these photos of the Moulin Rouge and the nude women, and we're like.
Arriving in Paris was very exciting. The walking around, like Suzanne mentioned, we would go to museums and we would go to theater and shows and walking around all the the areas of Paris that she mentioned. Living in the hotel room was somewhat aggravating because obviously it was crowded, and being the only boy, I had to be set aside. I think I slept on a blanket somewhere. And then once we got an apartment, it became much more stable. Although it was several flights up, there was no elevators. I was the one charged with going out and getting the bread, and so every morning I had to go down and brave the weather and get the bread for the family. But Paris was just very exciting. We knew French fairly well, and we got to pick up our Parisian accents by conversing with the Parisians. It fit right in. It was not traumatic.
By the time I got to Paris, I already knew my French. I didn't miss any school. My father I mean, from country to country, I mean, not a day we didn't go to school right away. I thought, oh, we'd be traveling, I'd be out of school. No such luck. He enrolled us in school like the day after we arrived in Paris. So I never missed school. And then coming here, then it was traumatic because of the English. I didn't understand why we had to leave Paris. There's no war. There's a lot of Jewish people. We're in a Jewish private school. But my father kept saying, we have to go to the United States. I'm not staying here. And Papi, please, no such thing. You know, I thought maybe he would have liked it after 3 years in Paris. But I understand now, as an adult, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in Paris. Even though we were protected with the Jewish school, synagogue, stay home on the Shabbat, the holidays, but it wasn't safe. Even 58 years ago, he knew this was not where he wanted to raise his family. And I give him a lot of respect for that. He was somebody that realized that the best country to be in is the United States.
We arrived in New York, and it was February, it was snowing, and it was a little gray, a little cold, but we were excited, and someone met us, and we spent the night in this amazing,
Beautiful.
Gorgeous hotel. Pure luxury.
It's
and I'm
probably
thinking,
just 2-star, but it was great to
for
us.
us,
It was like
we
on the
thought,
30th
oh my
floor.
God. And then the breakfast, and it was just superb. And then we fly from New York to Atlanta, and then somebody met us here, and then we go to our apartment on Charles Allen Drive, which was a 2-bedroom apartment. Again, it's February and it's cold. So I'm sitting in the screen porch. I'm like, but there's no people here. Every city we've ever lived in, we look out and there's people walking, and you don't see a soul in Atlanta. That was a big disappointment and lonely. And then my father goes to register us for school, and it was February, and they, looking at the 3 kids who don't speak a word of English. So, okay, you're going to the 3rd grade. Well, here I was, 13 years old, big girl, and I'm sitting in this little desk with little kids, and I'm like, okay.
Their experience in the neighborhood was nowhere near the same as mine. I went outside and I was playing with kids. I was learning to ride a bike. I learned about hitting a ball with a wooden stick, baseball. And so it was an outdoor experience. Whereas in Cairo, we lived in a high rise in the city. In Paris, it was crowded. All of a sudden, we're in America, and it's the outdoors, it's sports, and the weather wasn't all that bad even for February. And I embraced it. Of course, I wanted to be American bad. I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want to be different. And so the sooner I made friends, the better off I was, in my opinion, and it worked out good.
The first class they put me in was 1st grade, and they asked me to write my name on the board, and I wrote it in cursive with the accent aigu, and they decided they wanted to reprogram me, so they put me in kindergarten.
Susie and I started dating. We had a curfew. If we were not home by midnight, we were scared to death. And we had to date Jewish guys. So we tried to pick guys that looked Jewish.
And we'd give them different names.
And we gave him different names. My father was a little bit suspicious, but most of the time we went, it was okay, but he got wind of it.
At the time, girls went to Lake Spivey and picked up boys. So I went and picked up this guy, Buddy, and he was very cute. He was from East Point. So we have a date, and I worked at my father's store, and I said to him, Dad, I have to leave early from work on a Saturday, say 5 p.m., and took the bus, and I'm dating Joe Schwartz, whatever, a Jewish guy from wherever. So I get home, take a shower, get dressed, and I put a note on the door, Buddy, I'll be right out. just wait. So I go out with Buddy. I come home, and Dad is sitting in the living room with the note. So this is Joe Schwartz. You know? So that was that. We pressured our dad that it was time to buy a house. Cause we'd already been there since 1961. So this is 1967.
And all of our friends were moving north.
Right. And we wanted to find husbands, and who is gonna think much of us living in a duplex? It was time for us to move to a house. So my dad said, "Okay, we'll buy a house," and I think Mark said it was $26,000 on Hopkins Terrace. And my dad started a ledger, and we promised the moon. Mark was going to mow the lawn. We were all going to work full time and go to school full time. And we would give Dad the paycheck to pay for our health insurance and all of our clothing and all of our expenses. So he had a ledger. And at the end of the week, we would give him our paycheck, and he would say, "Well, this is what you owe, and this is what you owe, and this is what's left for you." And so I want to pass this on to my children, to understand that our work ethic started as a family project forever. It's ingrained in us that you give to the family. The whole family makes benefits, and can't do it without everybody pitching in.
Well, graduated in 65, and I took the SAT. I didn't score too high because they wouldn't allow me to take a dictionary. I'd only been in the States 4 years, and it was difficult. So the counselor said, "Your best bet is to go to Georgia State." So I applied. I got in, but I didn't have any money. So I applied for a scholarship through the Jewish Federation, and they gave me full scholarship, but I had to pay it back. And I lived at home, so I took the bus every day. So I went full-time the first year. Well, I had no money. And so the next year, I worked full-time and went part-time to school. And then I saved up some money. And then I went some of the classes in the afternoon, and I worked in the afternoon. Around there, I worked at Korea Emulsion, the cough medicine company. I worked many, many jobs, summer job, any job to have money for school. Off and on, until I was a junior. And then I met my husband at a party. I was 21. And a friend of his that went to Grady with me, I had gone out with him one time, and it just didn't work out. Well, he brought Mark. My husband's name is Mark, and my brother. So when I met Mark, and it was all right. And then I had been dating someone else at the time. So I had decided to go to Israel for 3 months. I just wanted to leave. So I left, and he was the first one to call me when I got back. And I just decided, I had dated a lot from the time I graduated high school until 21. And I decided, let's just get married. And unfortunately, his mother was very sick. And I met her, and we got engaged, and we had set the date for November, and she passed away. So she was not at our wedding.
I met my wife in synagogue when she was, I think, 15 and I was 17. But we never really hit it off. And turns out we were at the same high school. And I saw her in the hall, and she saw me at Grady High School. And, I asked her out once, and nothing came of it. And then I think in my junior, senior prom, I asked her out, and then we went, and really no sparks were flying. And then I went to Georgia Tech, and she was still 2 years behind. She was in high school. And we went out a couple more times, and lo and behold, it took. So we knew each other about 5 years before we got serious. And then in 1972, as I remember I was at a friend's wedding in Chicago. It was June '72, as a matter of fact. And Lily calls me. She was my girlfriend, my, significant other, I guess. And she says, "You got to come home." I said, "Lily, I'm in Chicago." She says, "Your dad's sick." I says, "Ah." So she calls me back a half hour later and she says, "Your dad died." So she was the one to break the news to me. And I came home and, we buried my father and what have you, moved back in, and we were closer than ever. And then I dropped out of school to help my mom with her business because she inherited my father's business. And she would come downtown and have lunch with me. Oh, no, she was working downtown at a museum, I think, yeah, the Wax Museum. So we had lunch one day, and we were trying to figure out, we had planned to move in together before my dad died. And, that plan was sent flying away. So I said, "Why don't we get married?" And she got nauseous for about a month. And we made that happen. We got married the very following month, a month later. Had Michael 5 years later, and he's our only child.
My father died when I was 17, so I spent my senior year, with my father, passed away, and most of my friends went away to college, and I had to go to college at home. So I went to Georgia State and chose nursing as my career. I had worked in Atlanta, moved to D.C. just to get away because I didn't get to go away. Even that, I got a little grief for leaving, but I felt like it was just something I had to do. I had to leave home, for myself, which was really good for me. And I came back and started working at Emory University Hospital, and that's where I met my husband. We got married in 1983. We were on a trip when he proposed. We were actually at another wedding, and we got engaged on Halloween and got married the following June. We have 3 children. It really means a lot to have the supportive family around. I feel like, they feel more grounded. They feel, having an extended support system.
So I was the first to get a job. When I was in high school, I decided I needed more money. So I went, and while I was a senior in high school, I took the test at Southern Bell, and I was a telephone operator. And so they would, because you'd work until 9 p.m., they would have a cab take me home because it was not very safe. And everybody was like, "Oh, look at Susie. She's so independent. She got her own job." And the relatives in Israel were so impressed. And I got my own phone because you work for the phone company. And from there, when I was in college, because I wanted to go daytime in college, I was able to transfer. I could have been already a manager or whatever, but I got married and we moved to Cambridge, so I didn't get promoted. That's the one thing that I'm disappointed about. I grew up in an era, in the feminist era, where women went to college and had careers. And so when I met my husband, I so believed in him that, because his mother was a Holocaust survivor and he finished the Israeli army. He was 23. I met him on his birthday, and we started dating. And he wanted to go to school full-time instead of part-time at Georgia Tech. So I said, "Well, you know what, I'll finish." I was already a senior. I said, "I'll go to school at night and I'll put you through Georgia Tech." And so that was the deal. It was a partnership. And he went through Georgia Tech in 2.5 years. And I worked full-time and went to school at night. And then he gets into all the law schools, and so rather than stay in Atlanta and get a career going for myself, I went to Cambridge. I was 27 when when Gregory was born. So we moved to Pittsburgh, and I went and got certified to teach in Pennsylvania, because when you teach, you have to be certified in every state. So I went to get my certification in Pittsburgh and went to University of Pittsburgh, and then we moved to Miami. So, okay, I'm in Miami. It just happened that every 2 years we were moving. So I think had we moved straight to Atlanta right away, I probably would have continued my career, because that was very important to me.
I graduated, I was 9 months pregnant with my first child. I had a daughter. And I didn't know at the time, but she was born with a birth defect. She passed away, she was 4 months old, and it was crushing to me. I had already gotten my teaching certificate. I could teach French anywhere, but I couldn't look at children. So I immersed myself in hobbies. I took decoupage, needlepoint, upholstery, photography, piano lessons. I did everything. And I got pregnant. I mean, that wasn't a problem. And I had my son. I was pregnant with my son, Brent, when my father died. I wasn't allowed to go to his funeral because they were afraid I was going to lose the baby. When Brent turned 13, I wanted to take him to Israel for his bar mitzvah. So we made it a trip. There was a convention with the business, and I conned my brother Mark and Liddy and Michael to come with us. It was the first and ever went back, 1985. It was really, really so unbelievable, because I was in Israel a week, then we took a bus, crossed the desert, got into Egypt, and stayed there 4 or 5 days. But in Cairo, we went to the Egyptian Museum, we went to the pyramids, and it was awesome. And I understood everybody speaking Arabic, and they were like shocked that I could converse with them. What are you doing? Why did you leave? I said, because we weren't wanted. I'm Jewish, you know. And they couldn't understand that, the people there. And you're talking about 30 years ago.
Mom was every bit the home mom, and she was a master cook, master seamstress, disciplinarian, and washwoman. She took care of 4 kids and a husband, a very demanding husband. My father was a man of the Middle East, and so he was a dominant type A kind of guy. She was always has been a caring, loving mother, and took good care of her 4 kids.
She really valued cleanliness. Cleanliness was godliness, and she passed it on to us, and we tried to pass it on to our kids as well.
Our grandkids dreaded when Mima, my mom, would give them a bath, because the way Egypt was a third world country and there was a lot of germs, and so she had our servant boil water next to our tub, and she'd pour boiling water on us and scrub us with a brush. Scrub. And Mark used to run away and hide under the...
I recall having to be pulled out from under the bed for my weekly bath.
And so the grandkids, when she would
Babysit.
She would babysit, or when I'd visit from Dallas. I used to live in Dallas, so she'd put them in the bathtub, and the boiling water was coming, and the brushing and the scrubbing never stopped. Our mother was always fair. She was very poised, very, I don't think any of us inherited that from her. We're a little bit on the wild side, but she's friendly, generous. They love her in the nursing home. They're just so kind to her, because she's 92 and still nice, A lot of times they're not so nice at that age. She she didn't have it easy with my father. In fact, when he died at the age of 56 and she was 48, she didn't want another man. She said, one in a lifetime is enough. But he was a great man, and she loved him, and he adored her. He was always Jeanne chérie, Jeanne chérie. So in my mind, which is why I know my husband wouldn't agree with what I'm about to say, I obliged him in his career and persevere. It was very hard in Cambridge to be away from my family and no friends and start all over again, 2 jobs. But part of my resilience is what my mom endured. When her family left in Cairo in 56, she would just sit every Friday. She would give us our bath, and I remember sitting in the apartment with her, and she'd be crying, missing her mother and her siblings quietly. So, and she had difficult in-laws, but she was always poised and never said anything bad about anyone. And so I guess being the oldest daughter and then 3 brothers, she never got the disease of gossip, which my sister and I, Judy and I, would sit there and we'd just tear people to shreds. So she would sit there next to us and say, "Arrêtez, stop, don't talk bad about people." She never, ever talked bad about anybody. So, and 1,000%, because like I said, she worked full time, came home, cooked dinner here, and cleaned the house, or had the day that the housekeeper would come, she would clean with her. She just was infatigable.
My mom always instilled on us the importance of being polite, being respectful, don't speak unless you're spoken to, and she was equally strict as my father, but in a different way, in a more motherly, loving way. And I was her son, so we had a real tight relationship, especially as I grew older, and then when my dad died, it was to me to move back in, which was traumatic for me. I had to leave my girlfriend and everything I had planned for that year and move back in with my mom. But it was a duty, and I was happy to do it.
She's the type of woman that went along whatever her husband asked of her. I later, as an adult, "Mom, how could you have let him do that?" She said, "That's what he wanted to do." It's like she accepted her fate. She was on a cruise ship, and she went to the Mediterranean countries, and she was sitting on the balcony with her friend, and she told me, she says, "I looked and I saw all those countries," and she said, "Thank you, Nasser, for kicking us out of Egypt. I got to see the world." Who would say that? And you see a lot of people her age, all they talk about is the past and what they left behind. Mom never, ever. She left her engagement ring in Egypt. They couldn't take her, she couldn't take anything. It says very few pictures from Cairo. Even though she worked at a studio, we had suitcases of pictures. I said, "Mom, why didn't you bring?" She says, "I had 4 kids to take care of and the clothes, and I'm going to worry about pictures." I said, "Mom, that was the most important thing." But in her mind, it was our safety, our comfort. That was my mom.
She worked in my uncle's store, which was very similar to my father's store. I don't really know, I think part of the arrangement was, it was just better for my mom not to work with my father, because my father worked with his sister and brother-in-law.
So my father, he was my life, everything to me. I respected him. I was a good, obedient girl. I would never challenge him. That's just a typical firstborn. My siblings don't see it that way. And I whatever Dad said, Dad went. It went. I mean, no question.
My dad, in addition to being an accountant, he was in the import-export business.
The strongest lesson from my dad was discipline. He was a big believer in accountability, keeping your word, doing the right thing, and being honest and disciplined. He did that in all his endeavors, whether it be keeping track of the contributions from the kids, keeping track of his partner's work hours. In his pocket when he died, I still have it, was the timesheet for everybody and how many hours they worked that week at the store where he died, where he owned and worked. So the accountant in him was pervasive.
I was actually there, here we go, when he had his heart attack and died. And I was the one that found him. So that was hard. And he had just had an argument with my aunt and uncle. And it was probably the worst argument I have ever witnessed them ever having. And you know, that was hard.
I wanted to wear makeup. I wanted to look like the Americans. I wanted new glasses. And my dad, being old world, couldn't stand to see me putting eye makeup. So I'd come home with my few pennies and I'd buy a whole new set of makeup, and he would break it and throw it away, and I would go and buy some more. I was 14, 15 years old, and he just couldn't stand it. But to change this topic, my father loved being in America. He would drive to not Panama City,
Chattanooga.
Daytona Beach. And every weekend was Lake Lanier, and going to
Stone Mountain.
to the
Lake
Fox
Spivey,
Theater.
Lake
Lake
Stone
Spivey.
Mountain.
He totally
Theater of the Under the
embraced.
Stars, which is now Chastain Park.
He loved being in America.
One of my memories of Daddy was when he'd get up every morning and pray. You know, religion was really big for him, and I think that faith got him through all these difficult times. You know, he would, wrap
The
Tefillin. He was just so righteous and pious.
Every Sunday morning, my father, after he finished his prayers, I don't remember what time he woke up, 7, 8, and we wanted to sleep late Sunday morning. He put on classical music
He had to wake us
so
up.
loud that you could not sleep through that music. And then he would
And
knock
he-
on the
yeah,
door.
He had that knock.
Phyllis. It's about Charlie Chaplin's movie with the fly, and he would annoy us to such a degree we had to get up.
That knock
You're
on the
sleeping
door.
your life away.
Yeah,
You're sleeping
and-
your life
But
away.
the classical music stayed in my mind. How I now love it because of the introduction from my dad on the radio. We didn't have much back then, but he was cultural in that way.
I thought it was a bit unfair that I was held to a higher level of discipline, and even though I rebelled and did my share of letting my hair down, so to speak.
Literally, too.
I remember a conversation he had with you, or an argument about, you were at Georgia Tech and you had long hair
And a beard.
and you were going back and forth, and you said, what's it to you that I have long hair? And he said, because you look like Charles Manson. Anyone that looks like Charles Manson is not worthy in my eyes.
I think we all pass to our children lessons from our past, and invariably, this is basically what he was instilling on us: is that you have to be ready, you have to assume responsibility. My earliest recollection in Atlanta is going to synagogue with my father, because the boy. So it was sometimes a pain in the ass, and demanded more of me than he did of them.
We didn't have to go.
We didn't have to.
And religion is not supposed to be pounded into you, and it was. So it was a bittersweet thing. But I remember even after I turned 13, 14, he demanded that I catch 2 buses on Tuesday nights and Sunday mornings to go to continuing Jewish education, which drove me absolutely nuts.
Hebrew High.
Hebrew High. I went berserk, and I couldn't revolt because he was still the dominant master of the house.
When I was 9 years old, or 8 or 9 years old, we lived in Alexandria, and because we were 1 year apart, my mom would always try to get one child to go with my dad, and so that she could have peace and quiet with whoever was left at home. So it was Yom Kippur, the day that you fast. So my dad took me to synagogue with him, and that meant all day. So that was the first time I ever fasted, because I was with him the entire day. And ever since then, I fasted from the age of 9, which is very young for a child. You're not supposed to fast until you're 13.
My father was pretty strict, and boys were expected to do this. Especially he was so tied up with the religion. We were thrown out because we were Jewish, and so to him, so you threw me out because I'm Jewish. I'm going to embrace my religion and I'm going to stick to it. It was not I don't know if he had a calling or what. I mean, he was probably always that way. But to me, it was a bit frustrating that, my friends were watching cartoons on Saturday mornings and I had to go to synagogue. But as a boy, the expectations were, you have to study, you have to achieve. And your sisters are going to, but it's more important that you study and achieve and get an education. I was given a lot of free rein, whereas the girls were not, because I was a boy. So I could take the car and go out and not have a curfew, but they did. So it was give and take.
I think my father was also, life came to him like in his face. He loved, for the family, shortly after we came to the U.S., a Friday night was sacred. It was Shabbat. We weren't supposed to go out. We were supposed to have Shabbat dinner, which is a meal to bring in the Sabbath with the family. And Judy and I, and Mark probably, said, Dad, that's when everybody goes out. No, we can't stay for Shabbat. And so he had to, much to his disappointment, let it go. Yeah. And so he gave up, and he was sad about that, because
no, but he didn't give up completely. We would have the dinner, and then Susie and I wanted to go to the football games at Grady. So we weren't allowed to spend money. We weren't allowed to ride a car. So I would buy my football ticket at noon from Grady, and I would take a bag or 2 popcorn. So I would walk. I already bought my ticket, and I already have my snacks. So we would walk to the stadium, not even half a mile, and we watched the football game. We still got into the American.
I mean, it was like a tug of war.
It was.
He loved being in America, but yet he didn't want to give up our religion, and so giving up the Sabbath was difficult to watch his daughters.
And he had to work on Sunday.
And he had to start working. Yeah. It was hard on him.
Hardship is not necessarily a bad thing. It's what shapes you, and you're gonna hit bumps in the road. That's. I'm the crier. But you're gonna hit bumps in the road, and it shouldn't deter you. And Lord, I think I repressed a lot of my bumps, and but that's what makes you stronger, and you just forge forward. And I mean, we had some rough times, but we had food on the table. There was always tomorrow, and my mother always instilled in us and me, you know, optimism, and I think that's probably my best characteristic is I'm always optimistic, you know, even when things don't go my way. I just feel like I can overcome this, you know, unless it kills me, I can, you know, I feel like I can get through anything, and that's what I want our future generations to know about me.
The main thing about not just having family is to be open, honest, and I try to relate to my children and now my grandchildren that we live in a world where honesty, integrity, education is what I grew up with. We all did. And never think by not telling the truth it's a good thing. And it's very important to me to be honest. And that's what I want to pass to my grandchildren. My children know that. Education is extremely important also. You know, you don't have to go to Yale or Harvard. You just get an education, whatever you're good at.
I wanted my kids to know my family, the immigrant experience that I had. I felt that I could never live without being near my family.
The sense of family that we have is a bond that has been there all along. We've experienced and gone through a lot together. And that's the key word, together. We should teach that to our kids, and Lord knows we do have togetherness with the sizable family we have. We get together a lot, and it's you know, we've had our arguments and we've had our disagreements, and but we've always stuck it out and stayed as a family, and I would hope that this continues. I sincerely hope this continues, because we've paved a fairly good road for them, and our children have things that we never dreamed about. And I've always said this to my wife and son: if I died today, I would have never dreamed that I'd accomplished and done everything I've done. I implore our kids to learn where they come from, what they're about,
Moving on up.
and who they are, and family is thick with us. I mean, we stick together.